Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Autopsy with Maddie P. I'm your host, Maddie P. Girl. What is cracking, Queen? There's not much going on in the world today, except for Miley Cyrus, Hannah Montana. And honestly, I used to have to choose a favorite internally. I'm like, do I want Hannah? Do I want Miley? Watching The Climb did something for me too. And our episode today is on identity, so kind of fits the bill. Maybe this is where it sparked, because to this day, Miley Cyrus is one of my favorite people ever. No Hannah involved. And I always landed on the side of Miley because it was just her, And I'm from South Carolina, so it just felt close to home. Hannah was just an LA girl. I couldn't relate the same. But seeing The Climb, I'm reminds me of my parents' farm. Whole nine, Anyways, I've had 2 cups of coffee today and I got cut from work. So that energy. And I got this fuck ass bun, which means that we mean business. So kind of an impromptu filming. I'm busted, which is not new to any of you. I'm just a little extra busted today. I don't like that you can see my door frame. Let me fix that. Better. And all this shit on the side. Better. So anyways, I have not watched it yet, and you will know when I watch it. I will come back and talk to you guys so much about Hannah Montana. My boyfriend the other day, my sweet, amazing boyfriend, played Hannah Montana in the car the other day, and I just needed that experience. The Climb is something very near and dear to my heart. And she is the OG Disney star. And I saw Raven-Symoné and some other whoever bitch on a podcast talking about who would be the Mount Rushmore of Disney. And Miley came up and Raven's like, nah. I just caught myself. I was about to hate on Raven, and I'm not going to do that because she is still Raven. And she is really, really funny, and I do love her deeply. But it's you exist because of being on some podcast. You're a comedian now, and that's fantastic. But nobody made it the way that Miley did. And then you got Demi Lovato in the backseat talking about that yogurt chain, tweaking the hell out, talking about mugs and inherited genes and shit. And Selena with the Rare Beauty. Selena popped off, but I'm not going to get too far into this, but we all know how I feel about Selena. And I think maybe it's a Justin thing. The correlation. And I honestly remember whenever I was younger, and I loved Nickelodeon, I loved Disney. And it's that performer in me, that tweaker Maddie, which we're talking about identity again, so we'll get there. But I remember my parents being you can't watch this, it gives you an attitude. It did. Big ol' attitude. Gave me some dance moves though too, I can't lie. And them just saying it's a phase, and my mom's very religious, to say the least. So, I'm definitely idolizing stars. My whole room. Y'all remember those magazines where you could take their face out and put it around your room? When I was 8, that was me. And I love that I still sit here and that's what I'm talking about today. It's just a deep love of mine. And, Disney is dead, and that's heart-wrenching and everything, but I'm really glad I lived through that era. Miss Rachel and the new ones. And I'm probably going to be saying the same thing to my kids, so. The 2 cups of coffee is really showing today. I don't really have any other new news. I think I've heard some fun things, but I don't really think I need to warm up today because I'm excited to talk about our topic. And today we were talking about identity. And of course, this is on a few different levels. I think mostly today it pertains to sobriety in a lot of ways. Going from being the party girl or drinking being a huge part of your identity to devoid of that. Is that the word? Is it devoid or devoid? I don't know. Kind of like sitteth. Tweaked. Absolutely tweaked. And I think it's an important topic because of our age. So I obviously had a desperate gut-wrenching struggle with identity. And I do think it's a common theme with people who I know who identified on the party drinking side, whether they had a problem or not, really struggling later with identity. But I do think that goes for a lot of people across the board based on our age. So today I want you to see where you fit into what I'm saying, and if that can help you in this jump from, and like, I'm 26, okay? This is the pool I'm referring to. So it's not necessarily an adolescence to adulthood. Like, where I feel my life is now is like beginning stages of adulthood to like true middle. Like, we're talking like owning homes. And why did I say that? But like, you like, that's the general vibe. I don't own any homes, but the general vibe of like, you know, like, I just don't want to say 30, I think is what's happening here. I think I'm just like scared to say that. I think it's extra hard because there is a big internal focus on identity. And by nature, we need somewhere to belong. Like how I talked about that one episode, like food, shelter, socialization. Like that is just part of our animalistic traits as people. And so I don't think it's fair to act like identity and where we belong doesn't matter. I do think we graduate, and I'll talk about it in my life in a little bit, into some sense of not giving a fuck what other people think and giving a fuck about what society calls on us. But it's not fair to act like it doesn't hurt when we are devoid of identity. So I do think it's important to take the questions that we have on identity and to make it fun. Because who you are now is not who you're going to be in even 10 years, maybe even 5, maybe even 2. So what I am saying, what I'm trying to get at, I'm going to pull it together. Maybe I should have done warm-ups, is that the internal emphasis on identity is something that we are going to accept today. And we are going to grow from and learn to enjoy those questions. So as a kid, I was always just like bubbly and fun. And from a young age, I noticed that I had the ability to make people laugh and the ability to make people smile. And I think I found an identity in that. And I was the girl dancing on the stage that we talk about and just having fun and making people do little videos and do what the fuck ever. But when I got older, I started to really horribly struggle with my confidence. And like, as you all know, with eating disorders and just sheer like derealization of who I was. And it really started to crumble. And so at some point in high school, I abandoned every talent that I had and chose to just be the entertainer and the fun party girl, because that was easy for me to fall back on. I could trust that talent, that no matter what, I can make somebody else smile. And it felt like it was because I really couldn't find my niche in high school. Like, I did sports and I liked art in middle school and different things, and I liked like performing to some degree. I always loved singing, and each thing I just didn't have the internal confidence to continue to take that route. And I think at my core, I knew I just wanted to scream. And growing up, I think in a small town in the South, I just didn't want to be what everybody else was telling me to be, and I couldn't ignore the urge to be different in that aspect. And I think, you know, I'm talking about it in what seems like a positive light, but it was not. Like, that's like posting whatever the fuck I want on social media, cursing loudly, like just being a fucking animal. And I just couldn't fit there. And so that caused me to get in trouble in school, which caused me to not be able to play sports and to get in trouble constantly. And even at school, I felt like I could be good at it, but I just gave up and cheated instead. And now I know I'm a smart person. I think looking back, I could have excelled. But instead, I chose that comfortable niche because I didn't have the confidence to even put in the hard work. So yeah, I just reverted to having fun. And I don't think that wasn't like a literal choice that I made at some point. It was just an internal instinct to rely on my comfortability. And from there on out, I was the party girl. And that was the identity I chose and who I was at like around like 15. And also, that was the beginning of when I started to lose myself and lose an understanding of who I was. And this is kind of like off topic a little bit, but I found this interesting. So, like, they say your maturity level when you start abusing drugs or alcohol is the age that you were when you started abusing drugs or alcohol. So, like, the first crisis that I had with pills, I was like 15. And I remember taking like liquor to school and taking pills, a lot of pills in high school at like fucking lunch. And my first like near OD, like I had like blood clots in my legs, and like I used to be like, I was a pill head in high school, and then I kind of like grew out of it. But I had taken like a fuck ton of tramadol basically, and had like blood clots in my legs, and woke up in like an IHOP parking lot. I was like 16. So when I got sober, I wanted to look back at those times as me being young and a kid and experimenting. But in reality, like, I was borderline ODing and like throwing up a lot, including blood. FYI, TMI, not FYI. So I do think this lens of the way that I talk about losing the party girl identity runs really fucking deep, and is from the viewpoint of somebody who has a drug and alcohol problem and mental health issues as well. So I don't think this will necessarily relate that deeply to everybody, but I do think it's important to share that story of mine because I was able to blossom and grow. And if you want to know how to crush the fuck out of drinking and drugs being your identity, that's something that you can do whether you have a problem or you don't. And take it from me, Miss X Pillhead. I'm just like sharing a lot today. I'm sharing a lot. And I don't know why I act like my first episode I talked about me being a cokehead. So like I don't know why I act like it's that big of a deal that I sit here and talk about pills. Anyways, so my only talent being left being used was making people laugh. And I emphasize this because not to be like, oh, I'm a funny bitch, whatever. I later in my life when I first started having really bad psychosis from drug use, from like acid and mushrooms and stuff, I was like a void of a person. And I've discussed this before. It wasn't who I was, but like the drugs had completely taken me over, and I was just like so deeply, like I wouldn't even use depressed as a word to describe it. I just did not exist inside of my body. Like you would look at me and my eyes were blank, and like it was like basically being fried pretty much. Like every circuit was blown out. And I remember having a memory, and this is so distinct to me and I keep it close to my heart now, but I had a memory of, I used to make people laugh. Like that was like my role. Like I was the funny girl. And I haven't done that in so long. I just sit and stare like everywhere that I fucking am, pretty much. And like yes, that was a phase of psychosis, but like I loved that memory came back in me, and it really did help me realize that I was struggling so deeply from depression and psychosis and anxiety and OCD and drug abuse. And like I didn't get sober clean after that. I didn't necessarily get a ton of help after that, but I knew that I wasn't who I used to be, and that was really important for me to recognize that maybe I'm fucking sick. Random memory to bring up. We're just talking today. We're just chatting. My potential thus died at 15, and so did my will. And I think it really caused me then to enjoy the void, because in reality, what I was creative and maybe even smart, dare I say. It was so much more than just a big personality that takes up a lot of space. And when that perished, that was when I fell in love with oblivion, because it was me laughing, having fun, and then this great darkness of the void of what I had given up inside. And I'm articulating that as a lot more deep now because I'm old enough and more wise to like, what's the word? To like explore that, to identify it as that. But, you know, at the time I didn't understand that, but I can look back and say that is when I started to love the feeling of just like not existing. And that's when things got a lot deeper for me. That's when drug and alcohol abuse came into the picture, and it's a lot more past the identity of being a party girl. Basically, because of all that, I struggled in building my new identity, because when I looked back trying to search for Maddie and search for the last time that I was like just authentically me, you know, like 15, 14 was when I started abusing drugs. And I could only really reach back into my childhood. That was the only time period of my life that I could trust that I was me. And that was like a really daunting thing too, because I recognized how much of my life I had been sick. And I think that was hard to stomach, but at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to heal my inner child and really trust my former self in some ways. And it allowed me again to put a lot of emphasis on healing the inner child. And I think the combination of that and like I was just so far gone from my identity. It had been 15 since I last really truly felt like myself. And the only thing that I could trust when I sat down to write this and thought back was whatever made me feel closest to me and what was bringing a smile to me authentically. And we've discussed before that like in healing, I struggled because I felt like I had to have fun and I had to have joy and I had to have peace. And it just wasn't authentically matching up. Take a shot every time I say authentically. And it wasn't a true smile from within. And so I started to, when I recognized that too, I started to really count the smiles. And it felt like the closest to me. And I love hearing people in recovery talk about their first like authentic smile or like belly laugh and them not being on drugs and alcohol. That's all I have to say about that. I just think that's really sweet. I don't remember mine, but I'm sure it was great. I think what really caused me to struggle in like the identifying of where I last existed, somewhat, lack of a better term, where I last was like, is this Maddie or is this a girl coping with what she's been through and coping with the existential dread of being a person? And I could not put my finger on it. I just really struggled with not being me anymore. That I have told y'all the story of me standing outside of my restaurant when I knew that I had to get help. And like, that was the only answer at this point. And I was so far gone and I was like gut wrenching, sobbing. Like I didn't stop for hours, like uncontrollably sobbing that I couldn't be me anymore, which is this party girl, which is getting fucked up. To me, it was as deep as that person completely dying. And I took it as that deep because I knew I couldn't keep surviving like that. And I knew that sobriety was going to have to stick for me or it was going to be like a world of terror and me continuing to try it. It just wasn't, my life wasn't going to work out. And I had somewhat, obviously, that's proof there was somewhat a little bit of faith in me that I deserved more and that I am enough. And I didn't know that at the time, but me essentially kind of passing away really, really hurt. And it went a lot deeper. I've suffered with derealization a lot in my life. And I think it really blossomed around drug use and with acid and stuff. And then really, really deep depression. And those things kind of stuck where I just, hold on. So not only did I not feel like I had an identity, I didn't feel like I was a person. And that was an emotion I had been escaping and tried to silence and cope with drugs and alcohol. But now it was like the truth. And I knew that I didn't really think I existed. And that's a weird and complicated topic that I'm not going to continue to divulge, but it was something serious. It was something fierce. I was essentially then, and this was like first getting sober, I was essentially like grabbing at anything, at like sticks to put me back into a box to fit back into society. I had to fit somewhere. And again, it was like that natural, I don't blame myself for that. Like that's such a natural thing. And when you're stripped down like that, you're just so lost. And then it's like, so back to the childhood thing. In childhood, I knew I created. I like to create. I like to sing. I like to dance. And I like to make people laugh. And I like to like create art. Not that I'm an artist. I'm not good at making art, but I always painted and stuff like that. And it was just something that I love to do. And so I leaned into that aspect a lot. It gave me a hope that I could still be that bubbly girl, that I wasn't so far gone and so stripped from the identity that was closest to me, that was party girl. And of course there was a yearn to be back at that, and we'll kind of like re-loop at that. But I just knew that that version of me had to be out of joy of life and peace, and it had to come from within, not in this way that I had to perform for others, or that was the only quality in me that mattered. You know, in having that hope and those realizations from my childhood and getting close to that again, there was like a huge roadblock. And the big roadblock was that I wasn't happy and that I wasn't joyful and that I was really fucking sad. And that puts a really big gap in between me and the joyous child that I'm trying to reach back out to. So it like called for me to see identity as so much more, as something really deep and something extremely internal. And it caused for this radical acceptance of my traumas and the dark sadness that I had been through. Because there wasn't any way but to kind of like unite those versions of myself, because I didn't want to see it like this, but that darkness was a huge part of who I was now. And later I would get to heal, but in that moment, and I still count it as like not a huge part of who I am now, but it's a huge part of my story, my life. And that's why I come on here to talk. I come on here to talk about sobriety and about healing, but it's about like that darkness that I felt I was going to be entrenched with for my entire life and was for a majority of my life. And that is allowed to be an aspect of who I am. And now it's a beautiful story that I get to tell of triumph and of joy and of struggle and blood, sweat, and tears to get out of it. But it was embarrassing for me to accept that as part of who I was, because I had come from this joyous girl to this broken 24-year-old hopeless, lost version of myself. And I had to find a way to put those together. I was hurting because I didn't belong to anyone anymore. I didn't belong anywhere anymore. I thought I belonged in a fucking club. Turns out I don't belong there. I don't belong at Uptown fucking Social and Share House anymore. And luckily it was like, it did dawn on me early that like I belong to myself though. And those kind of little moments and realizations I had added up for consistency and success in my sobriety. Because it was like this deep yearn to be reconnected with the fact that I do belong to myself. And that's what made me unique at such a young age, was this fierceness. And I wasn't scared of what society thought. I wasn't scared of anything. I was just me. And that gets out of hand. That's a quality in people that gets out of hand quick and later in life can do some damage. But I wanted that back so fucking bad. And it was in a new healthy hope that I get to belong to me. And I didn't yet, but the idea, even the thought of it, made me want to pursue sobriety and healing and a new identity so much more. And I learned it was important not to invalidate my feelings or any experience that I had been through, which is something that I did for most of my life. As you all know, I hated talking about my feelings. Now my identity wouldn't be about just my best qualities or quenching my human yearn to fit back into a box. I am still me on my worst days. I am still my responses. I am not somebody else. And I think that realization in its own came a lot with when I started to learn accountability, and that, you know, there wasn't an excuse for my actions. And it was like an all-encompassing, nurturing realization that I am also a human who, just like everybody else, doesn't respond well, who has pretty serious trauma, and who's kind of fucked mentally in the head. And, you know, that was okay. If anything, that helped reunite me back with life too. A little off topic. So because of that, and without really declaration of this, I fell into a new identity. And it was the blueprint, was this identity. This identity would be growth. And I think it's interesting to sit back when I think about the beginning stages of my sobriety, because it's a lot like my higher power. And that was that it's not defined for me. That my identity was not defined. It broken and redefined in this big way that everyone talks about. My higher power wasn't constructed in this big way that everybody talks about. All of this stayed rather ambiguous for me. And I don't know if it was a way for me to break things down to uncomplicate it, whatever the word is for myself, or I think that's just how I was most comfortable. And I couldn't find a new identity at that point. And I'm glad I did. But that blueprint was what I want to become, not fitting back into a box and not for society, but simply for me. What do I want to be? At this point, I'm escaping the boxes, and I can recognize that within my life. I am not in the market for building new boxes. What I wanted to be was really simple. It was happiness. The reason I sit here today, the reason I talk about the dark, gloomy shit, happiness, kindness, peaceful. I wanted to be responsible. I wanted to be consistent. I wanted to be strong, and I wanted to be a woman that I could be proud of. And I looked up to people. There are people in my life who I emulated. I wanted to be like them. And that was the building of this blueprint. And I think it gave me hope. It just gave me courage, and it gave me somewhere to go. It was just important that I felt safe in my skin again, because it didn't give me an answer, but again, it gave me a direction, and it gave me a plan to get there. And then I would from there grow into this sober girl that, isn't perfect, doesn't necessarily know who she is or anything, but I'm sober and I'm choosing healing every day. And with that came another identity crisis, as if me free floating alone being ripped away from this party girl wasn't enough. I really struggled with imposter syndrome. And I think that is my self-destructive ways coming back. And that's something I still fight to this day. And we've discussed it before, like with the vaping thing. I know. But there's like a cap that I put on myself where I get to be great, but like we have to cap it. Can't be doing too good out here. And so I just felt like the sober life wasn't really mine. And it was a huge lack of trust and confidence in myself for sure. But I really thought from then on out that I was going to break and I was going to drink. And that is why I talked about sobriety some to people, but I knew in reality it wasn't something that I could hold up with, because there was no proof I held up with anything in my fucking life. Not only that, but I couldn't trust that I had made real progress, and I had. But internally I'm like, are you really kind? Are you really honest? Are you really trying to enjoy your life? And I just couldn't trust it. But it did present me with each day. Then I would ask these questions. Is this what I really want? And is this who I really am? Is this what I really want to spend my time doing, what I want to do? And the answer kept being yes. And it allowed me that trust. And it helped me out of that imposter syndrome, which I'm really thankful for, because I do think that it would have caused me to drink and just to crawl back into my old ways. And that's a really hard part about breaking habits, is I think the imposter syndrome crops back up in people more than they realize, that you don't think you can do it. Is honestly what it is internally. It's not as deep as this isn't my life. It's that you're I couldn't have possibly accomplished this much. There's no way. I couldn't have done that. So the answer being yes over and over again over time allowed me to trust that I am capable of change, which was another internal struggle I had, where I just felt like I was lying. That's how deep it went. I'm like, am I lying about this? I wasn't. I was really, truly changing, and I was truly capable of change. And I grew that confidence in myself that this is my life and I deserve it. I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel that I deserved a sober girl lifestyle, that I get introduced to things like peace and harmony. The fuck, I didn't deserve it. And I do think that was some of the first traces of understanding that I did deep down, and that I deserved to heal from what I've been through, and that it wasn't my fault. And again, we don't talk about trauma that much on here because I'm not a doctor and I just don't think it's appropriate, but I struggled deeply with things happening to me and me thinking it was my fault. And that's something now I think I revert back to when my circuits are low, and it's just a big blame game, and that's an issue with confidence. But I just thought everything was my fault, and to some degree we have acceptance in sobriety, and we have accountability. And we know that just because we're sick, just because we suffer from drugs and alcohol, doesn't eliminate us from being a piece of shit. And all the shit we've done. And I stand by that firmly. But at the same time, there were things that happened to me that were out of my control. And I put myself in circumstances I shouldn't have. And all of that is true. But at the same time, bad things were done to me at different points in my life. And, I suffered. And how did we get here? We're going to loop back because I don't know how I got there. But It really helped me, the imposter syndrome and everything really helped me with grieving with my past, because I could see that there was so much more to life. And that was a really important eye opener for me, in identity in general, and it maybe not even being as deep as it is for myself with the whole drugs and alcohol and everything, but in general, for people that are just struggling on a much smaller scale, that there's so much more to life than that. And it reunited that little girl and that party girl in me, because there was this truth that I could see that that's what I really wanted all along. I'm creative and I'm fun and I'm bubbly. I say again for like the 50,000th time, but I'm also introspective and I'm poetic and I'm deeply emotional and I feel things very deeply. And that's like an explorative attitude to have, that there's like a learner in that. And that's part of my personality and just who I am. And being sober is what granted me that, and exploration is what granted me that opportunity. And that was the proof that the party girl part was somebody that was just coping. That's the scary part of stepping out of that identity, because what if that's what you really are? What if that's it? And that loomed over me. And it was proof that she was coping and that I was so much more. And it was a wonderful experience. I think it's important to know that wasn't all I could be. And I had thought that since I was 15, and I had to be patient with that. If I think all I can be is a party girl and that's all I'm fucking good for, basically, since I was 15 years old, that's like 10 years of that shit. That's not easy for me to like stand up and be like, okay, I'm going to go find my new identity and figure out who the fuck I am. Like, it's that question of like, it's like when people change careers, like in midlife crisis, like, can I equate that to that? In the beginning of sobriety, then, or like really of finding identity. And I think I was lucky because somebody in the meetings or the rooms, or maybe my sponsor, somebody put emphasis on the identity factor. And I think that person could see that I was struggling internally with that battle. And I didn't want to voice what that meant to me, because it meant a great deal of despair. And I had done so much more looming and complicated thinking over it than I even cared to admit to myself, because it's embarrassing to be deeply broken and sad and depressed that you don't party. Seems like lunacy, And I think it's fair, though, at the same time. Anyways, so I did a lot of like living in the truth. Honestly, like that's all I could do. And the truth was that I didn't want to go out. I wanted to be numb and I wanted to not feel anything. I didn't want to go out. That was the truth. And sober me knew that to be the truth, because I didn't want to fucking go. And I made myself go. I tried to fit back into this party girl that wasn't me anymore. And maybe I fucking hate going out. And then like, I didn't need to be seen. That's what I needed. I needed to be seen and I needed attention. But in reality, what I wanted was to hide. But I had to have somebody tell me that I'm worthy, or look at me and think I look good. Like, even if nothing comes from it, it mattered to me, because that's how much confidence I lacked. And I think it's important for me to admit that here, because people don't admit that about themselves, And I think I will applaud myself for that, because I think it does take courage to come on the internet and say that I needed attention. And it's embarrassing and it kind of sucks, but it was a huge fact of life. I needed eyes on me. And that's because I felt completely and totally worthless. And in reality, I just wanted to hide. That is all I wanted, was to hide. And so I lived in that truth, and I stayed at home and I watched TV, and eventually I got fucking bored. And what I grieved wasn't the party girl who had died. What I grieved was oblivion, was that I could put my problems into this box or into a pill form and swallow it with alcohol. And I'm glad that I had those internal realizations, because, when you're sitting at home bored with TV, itching for liquor, you just want to go out. It's important to see the truth. And that's why I emphasize the truth in healing and living in that, even if it's difficult, because otherwise I might not have made it either. But in reality, I knew that I was missing the void. And also in reality, I knew that my mask had fallen off, and the truth of being a broken person was something that I couldn't hide from myself anymore. It wasn't something I could hide from other people, and I missed that mask where I could walk around and I could smile and drink it away and pretend that I am who I think I am. Like, and I couldn't do that anymore. And it caused me to stay inside. But if you notice, when we talked about this, I didn't ever say a time that my identity was refound and reconstructed, because that was something that was constructed over time. And I think that identity, the way we talk about it, is like a paradox. And it's this, yes, societal norm and pattern that we do kind of need to fit into, but in reality, it's not as deep as it's emphasized to be. As simple as observing my patterns and over time my behaviors, and who am I? What do I stand for? Who am I on my bad days? What are my negatives? Who am I as an all-encompassing human being? My identity isn't about what I present as and what box I fit in internally or externally. It's an understanding that I have for myself. My identity has always been there. Identity isn't something that we are just avoid of, like we think. We belong somewhere, we just don't accept it, and we don't know it because we don't know ourselves. And that is all identity boils down to, is exploration of self. And I think we want to act like it's this identity crisis, but in reality, we, yes, don't know ourselves, but we also don't know we're enough, and or don't think that we are capable, have the confidence to hold enough space to say that we are an identity, like an entity. Does that make sense? Like, and this was a personal thing where I, again, back to the derealization thing, where I just felt like I wasn't a person, and like I wasn't experiencing life the same way other people were. And like, yes, I wasn't, but like in this deep way that I can't even put to words right now, where like I didn't feel like a human being. And I'm really glad I grew from that, because then I got to have those really deep explorative ideas where I now understand that like we just aren't what we want to be too. And it's an identity crisis because we maybe are internally recognizing, maybe subconsciously, that we aren't who we say we are, or we aren't who we want to be. And maybe we thought we were this whole time and we're not. And that's where those two things don't coincide, I guess. So we call it an identity crisis, because like maybe it's partly we think we're one thing, we want to be one thing, but we're actually this, and we're not honest with ourselves. And so I think it gave me a huge chance to recognize that identity to some extent is meaningless. It was all along a huge strain for me to belong, because I could recognize I know who I am and what I want. That's what identity was. That's what it was the whole time. It wasn't these characteristics of who I am or this class of person. And I think that's like also hard in us girls, because like, do we want to be like this type of girl? Are we a sporty girl growing up? Are we like a shiny girl, a sparkly girl? Maybe I'm crazy for saying this. I'm a demented human being, but like picking one thing to be, right? Again, like with the box. And I think that's what we view identity as. And it's so important how we're perceived, but that's not the honest truth. And when I sit down to honest to truth tell you about this, not as like sober girl content, like you can build who you are, you can build the woman of your dreams. Simply, to me, identity meant that I exist as a person. And that's what it meant to me. It wasn't necessarily the building of who I am, but it was like I identify as a human being. That's how simple it was for me. That's what it had to boil down to. And that comes from a complicated person with a complicated past. But that's what it looked like. And I do think a lot of that has to do with worthlessness. And I think worthlessness goes a lot deeper in all of this than we care to admit. Like there's no way, even as a confident, fully capable person, like you have doubts. And there, maybe not even that there was experiences in your life and pieces of your life, where you doubted to a deep extent that caused you to question your identity. So now I may be the daytime friend, and I may be the friend that says no, and I may be the homebody, but I am so much more than that. And I'm so glad I got the opportunity to know that it doesn't matter that I'm the homebody friend. It doesn't matter the labels that are placed on the outside of me. It matters what's happening on the inside of me and the depth to which I know myself. That's my identity, the depth to which I know Maddie. And internally, I belong on planet Earth as is. Internally, that's something I've accepted. The grief process, I think, is definitely hard, but you are not as dark and as far gone and as worthless as you think you are. And the only way out of that process is through. And that's a cheesy thing that I say, But if you're struggling with identity, it's the truth. And you are so much more than a party girl label. That shit doesn't matter. If your identity is found in drinking, it is so much easier to overcome those obstacles than you think. So bury that bitch. Bury her and don't grieve her a day if you can help it, because it's stupid. And I wish that I could go back and uncomplicate the death of her and the grieving process of that. And I think that's its whole own entity and conversation, but I think that it balances on the factor of romanticizing. And, you know, that's just not a conversation I want to have. I want to talk about growth here. So anyways, I hope any of that made sense. I'm very coffeeed up and my camera's going to die. So I love you and you're worth a lot. And I hope you have a great week. Bye.